Kumar. I am an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at KSHEMA Medical Academy, Nitte University, Mangalore. Today, I and my colleagues, Dr. Santosh Prabhu, who is also an assistant professor in our department, and Ms. Agnita Ayman, who is a psychiatric social worker, we will be talking about stress and stress management. Now, over the last 10 to 12 months, the world has witnessed unprecedented pandemic, and it has been stressful for almost all of us. In fact, saying it's just stressful is a bit of an understatement. And we go through stress all the time. So at these times, it's all the more important to think about what stress is, understand stress, understand what causes stress, and look at how we can cope with that. And we know that stress has effect on our bodily functions and our immune system. And the better we'll cope with it, the better the outcome it is for us. So today I will be covering the basic concepts of stress, and then my colleagues will take over and we'll look at different concepts of stress and how we appraise stress, and then look at stress management strategies as well. Okay, I hope my screen is visible to everyone now. So just thinking about what stress is. So imagine you have to give a presentation at work or in college, and you've prepared your presentation. It's already, you're mentally prepared, and you're quite confident about giving the presentation. And just before the presentation, you take your laptop out, try to switch on your laptop, and it doesn't come on for some reason, and you're trying to get it started. It takes a long time to get it started. And then eventually when you get it started, you realize that the files that you're supposed to present is missing. It's got accidentally deleted. And imagine in such a scenario, what would go through your mind and how you would respond to that such a situation. Now, most of us may find such a situation really stressful, but some of us may deal with it differently and think, oh, you know, I have got a backup file in my email and I'll just download that email file and continue with my presentation. So people may react to the same situation differently. So stress, when we call stress, stress is defined by how our body reacts to demands. And these demands and these situations can be either external or internal demands. Now, external demands can be anything like the environment, the weather, for example. Say, for example, you have an important meeting to attend or an important function to attend, and you're all dressed up. And just as you leave, it starts raining heavily. And that can be a difficult situation for some of them. So this would be an external stressor. Or the demand could be internal. Say, for example, you're not feeling particularly well in yourself, or you haven't slept well the previous night. And there are other things worrying you, and that could be an internal demand. So all these external, internal demands interact to see how we react to particular situations, and this is what causes stress. Now, all of us behave differently during stress because of the way we perceive stress. Say, for example, if you're told that you have to go on a roller coaster ride in the next few minutes, some of us may feel very excited about it because we look forward to it. It's an exhilarating experience for us. But some of us, it could be a very scary experience. We don't feel comfortable about it. So the situation that are presented to us is the same, but how we perceive it, how we see it, may be different. And depending on how we see that situation, we may either feel excited or exhilarated, or we may feel afraid or stressed or anxious. Another situation may be public speaking. You know, giving a talk in public for some people might be a very interesting thing. It's an opportunity for them to put their views across to others. For others, it may be very anxiety provoking, and it may worry them, you know, what will people think about me? What if I make a mistake? So such thoughts can bother them. Another example may be relocating to another country. Now, especially when we have to relocate to another country with a different culture and a different language. For some people, it might be an opportunity to know different culture, to learn about the different language, different people, their traditions, their experiences, and that they can look forward to such an experience. But for some others who are worried about letting go of your traditions and getting adjusted and getting used to accustomed to another culture, it can be a daunting experience for them. So based on how we perceive the situation and how we anticipate the situation to be, we could perceive stress in different ways. So just think about whether stress is necessary. Now, whether we like it or not, stress is a part of our lives. Almost all of us do experience stress at some time or the other in our lives. Now, whether it is necessary or not is something that we need to think about. So imagine we've all been to colleges, we've been to high school and things, and we've all faced examinations. Now, for many of us, examinations are a stressful experience. And many of us don't look forward to the examinations, but we also recognize that it is because of the examinations that we learn better, we study better, we retain information better, and we perform better. And it becomes a process of development and a stepping stone to success in our future lives. So although examinations can be a stressful thing, it is sometimes a necessary thing because it aids in our development and our progress. So depending on how we perceive these situations, the stressful situations, we can either call it as eustress or distress. Now, eustress is a situation where a similar situation which has the potential to cause stress, but it actually makes us feel better, makes us feel energetic, makes us feel adaptable and approachable and relaxed, and we look forward to that. Such a situation, although it has the same bodily responses to a distressful situation, this is called eustress. Distress is just the opposite. When we anticipate a situation to be exhausted, anxiety provoking, and frightening, and then we become fretful or aggressive or defensive. If we experience these negative experiences, then that situation, we call that as a distressing situation. Now, this is the Yerkes-Dodson model of stress. Now, what that says is, as your stress level increases, to a certain point, our performance also increases. Say, for example, you have to run a marathon or a running race, and your competitors, your other participants, do not run as fast as you, or they're much slower than you. Then there's not much competition, and you could be more relaxed about the race, and you would still win. But in terms of your individual performance, you may not be performing at your peak levels. So when there's someone who is really close to you and pushing you to run better, then our performance tends to increase. So as the stress levels increase, up to a certain point, our performance increases. When there is too little stress, we tend to underperform. Our performance is not as great, and we are laid back and inactive. But when there is optimal amount of stress, then our performance increases. Now, when the stress levels go beyond what is optimal, or when it lasts for a much longer period of time, then there comes a point where we feel fatigued, and then this can lead to exhaustion. And when this happens, our performance starts to drop. We see this in marathon runners. Up to a certain point, they would be leading a race, but when they start feeling fatigued and exhausted, they start running slower, and then eventually tend to lose the race. And if the stress level increases further, our performance drops further, and this is the stage where we come to the red zone, where we experience panic or anxiety or anger, frustrations, and we eventually break down. So just thinking about why we should talk about stress management. Now, we all have certain resilience, certain resources within us. that help us cope with our everyday experiences. And most of the time, these resources, these strategies that we have in ourselves are useful for us. But when it comes to a stressful experience, we may not utilize these resources effectively. And that can lead to a situation becoming more stressful. So by learning to cope and manage stress better, we utilizes our internal resources better and use effective coping strategies. And coping strategies can always be learned. And there are we have our way of coping, but sometimes there may be other ways of coping which may be more useful and better for us. So that is one of the reasons why we should think about managing our stress. And of course, if we perceive a situation as stressful, that causes burden. And with burden, our performance tends to decrease and our quality of life, our satisfaction tends to decrease as well. So in order to reduce the burden of stress, we should be thinking about managing stress better. And people who learn stress management skills respond to a greater degree of stressor, but return to their resting state sooner than those not trained. Say, for example, you have to run a marathon of, say, 20 kilometers. People who run every day and are trained to run 20 kilometers, they are able to perform the task of running the marathon. And once they perform that task, once they finish the marathon, they come back to their usual physiological state much quicker, as opposed to someone who's not trained, who is not used to running even 5 kilometers a day, and we ask them to run 20 kilometers marathon. They find it extremely hard, extremely tiring. And once they finish, even if they manage to finish the race, eventually it takes them much longer period to come back to their usual state of health. So they may have aches and pains in their body that may last a couple of days before they come back to feeling normal. So by training our body how we can prepare ourselves for a marathon in a similar way, by learning to cope with stress better, we are training our mind and preparing ourselves to cope with stress better and come back to our usual state of health much better in terms of stressful situations. So when we talk about stress, there are three elements that we should be aware of. One is the stressor. Stressor is the stimulus or a situation that induces or causes stress. So this can be anything, like I said, can be internal event or an external event. So anything that has a potential to cause stress is called a stressor. And then there is stress reactivity. Stress reactivity is how our body and our mind respond to that stimulus or to that situation. That is called as stress reactivity. And the outcome of the stressful experience or the stressful situation is what we call as strain. So this can be fatigue, this can be sleeplessness, or this can be mental exhaustion, frustration, depression, etc. So now stressors can be classified in four ways. It can be biological or environmental. Examples for these could be toxins in our body or relating to the recent COVID pandemic. If you're experiencing unwell or ill health and you've had a viral infection, that then becomes a biological stressor. Or it could be environmental, like excessive heat, excessive cold, or being stuck in a closed environment in a small room for a long period of time. So those are environmental stressors. Stresses can also be psychological. It could be anything that causes threat to our self-esteem, to our confidence level, that causes depression in us, or internal worry, internal anxiety that we experience. It could be our personality traits as well. Stress can also be social or sociological. These could be, for example, financial loss or having lost our jobs, unemployment. And this is something that we've seen in the recent days as well, with the financial difficulty that the country and the world has been facing. Lots of people have had unemployment and financial loss. These are social stressors. And with the COVID-19, again, people have to quarantine themselves. People have had to isolate themselves when they become unwell. So the social isolation is also a huge fear among people. So this causes social stressors. It can be philosophical in nature. For example, when someone retires, after having worked for 40-50 years in a particular company or a particular role, then they may be left with thoughts like, what do I do with my life now? What is the purpose of my life? What is my goal in life? So these are philosophical questions, philosophical thoughts that go through someone's mind. So this can also be a stressor. Now, sources of stress can be either external or internal, as we just explained a while ago. Now, stressor, there are another way of classifying stressor. There is looking at stressor as a single event or a long-term ongoing series of events. For example, failing an examination, or having to face a job interview the next day, or having lost a job recently, having experienced an accident, or having to meet a deadline at work. These things are one-off events, and these are called as event stressors. So the stressful situation will last only until the event lasts. Once we overcome that event, when we go past that event, we are able to cope better, and we can come back to our usual state of health. These are called as event stressors. On the contrary, there are some situations which can cause prolonged stress. Example might be an ongoing war, or as we've seen recently, effects of cyclone or earthquake or natural disasters, some kinds of financial problems which can go on for a long period of time, being stuck in a difficult relationship, a marital discord and an abusive relationship that has gone on for several months or several years. Sometimes being stuck in a job that you're not satisfied with, and you're left in a situation where leaving a job or finding another job is not a practical solution, but continuing the job is also not practical because you still have to earn a living. So that can cause an ongoing unsatisfactory job or career, or having difficult colleagues at work. So these kind of things, interpersonal problems, can cause ongoing stress for longer periods of time, and those things we call it as chronic stressors. Now, I want us to just think about what situations in our lives causes stress for each of us. And if you can spend a couple of minutes, you can pause the video at this point and note down the different kinds of stressors we've experienced, that you have experienced in your lives, and just make a note of all the different situations which has been stressful for you. It could be, like I said, biological, environmental, internal or external, psychological, any kind of different stressful factors that you have found particularly stressful for you. Just to keep a note of them so you can relate to this when we talk about how we manage stress and what factors affect your stress. So just take a couple of moments to just note down a few common stressors in your life. So we'll pause the video here, and my colleagues will take over from here, and we'll come back to talking about how we measure stress.
Good day, everyone. Namaskara ellarigu. Thanks for being here. ನನ್ನ ಹೆಸರು Dr. Santosh Prabhu. I'm a consultant psychiatrist and assistant professor in KSHEMA Medical Academy, part of Nitte University. I'll continue the stress management discussions that Dr. Shishir has started, and we'll see how we go. So now I'll perhaps start talking about how you respond to stress and learning a few things about yourself during stress. Okay. How do we respond to stress? Can I just get you all to consider what is your usual response to stress? Stress bandaga ನೀವು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ? ನಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರದು ಒಂದು ಯುನೀಕ್ ರೀತಿ ಇರ್ತದೆ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ಸಿಗೆ ರೆಸ್ಪಾಂಡ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ. Say some of us we get angry when there is stress. Some of us we feel sad when we are stressed. Some of us become more quiet. All of us have different responses to stress. The reason why you are saying you need to know why you respond to stress is because that can often be a signature. That can be your signature on how you respond to stress. Sometimes you might not realize you are stressed. ಕೆಲಸದಿಂದ ಮನೆಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ತೀರಾ, ಮನೆಯವ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಸಿಟ್ಟು ಬರ್ತದೆ, ಕೋಪ ಬರ್ತದೆ, ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಮೇಲೆ, ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಮೇಲೆ ಅಥವಾ ಗಂಡನ ಮೇಲೆ ಕೋಪ ಬರ್ತದೆ. You get angry at them and you don't know why you respond in that particular manner. Sometimes you respond quite not so good manner, and that might be stress. But until you know that that's how you respond, you wouldn't know that you are stressed. As I said, all of us have got different methods. Some of us feel sad, some of us feel frustrated, some of us get angry. For some of us, it doesn't really matter. We appear happy. We can put an exterior happiness regardless of how we feel. And sometimes that's important to know as well. However, when stress becomes, quite difficult to deal with, we often deal with it in one of the three types. So first one, what we talked about was your emotional reaction. The second, what we are talking about now, is your behavior in response to stress. When we are sometimes confronted with difficult situations, we fight. We say we are going to do this. I've been given a difficult task. ಅದು ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗುದಿಲ್ಲ, ಕಷ್ಟ ಇದೆ, ಆದರೂ ನಾನು ಯಾವುದೋ ಒಂದು ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಅದು ಡೀಲ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. I'll fight with it. I'll respond to it with putting more effort in, and so on. Sometimes when it gets to a point where you cannot deal with it, you then take a flight. You just avoid that situation altogether. You run away from that situation. So sometimes it can be where you have a boss who's difficult to deal with. Sometimes you don't want to deal with them. You don't want to fight with them. You just decide that avoiding the person might be an easier way to do. Now, I'm not saying that one way is the right and the second way is the right. Sometimes, each of them can be the right thing to do. And we'll come to that later on. We'll talk about, what is the right way to deal with stressors. But it's important to know that these are the different responses. And the third one is freeze. Freeze is when you just don't do anything. You just stay there mum. And sometimes that frustrates the opposite person as well, who wants to get a response out of you. And you just stay there mum. You just stay there without saying anything, without reacting. So these are the stress responses that happen. Now, why I put these in and why we need to know about it is to know if you are using one method more than the other, or knowing are you consciously aware of what methods you are using. Sometimes we fight all along. We fight for everything, and sometimes it's not worth fighting because it wouldn't lead to a good outcome. Sometimes we avoid everything. We fly away from all difficult situations. And while using flight sometimes might be a good option, using it all the time might again not be a good option. And sometimes we freeze. We just don't do anything. We don't fight. We don't flight. And again, in extreme responses, that might even be considered acceptable. But what we are talking about now is to understand which response we use more often. Once you know what emotions you develop, and once you know how you respond to this stress in a behavioral manner, you will be able to better understand yourself. Okay, I'll just briefly talk about short-term and long-term effects of stress. I don't want to take too much of time, but it is important that you know a little bit about it. Now, a lot of you are in stressful situations. ಸಿಕ್ಕಾಪಟ್ಟೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಇದೆ. ಈ ಪ್ಯಾಂಡಮಿಕ್ ಶುರು ಆಗೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಸುಮಾರು ಜನರಿಗೆ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಹೆಚ್ಚಾಗಿದೆ. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತ್ರ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಸುಮಾರಷ್ಟು ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ನಮ್ಮನೆ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಇದೆ. So there's quite a bit of stress happening. What are the effects that happen? In the short term, ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಸಮಯ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಇದ್ರೆ, you might see some changes, some physical changes in the sense that your weight might come down. You might start developing a few dark circles around your eyes. You might look a bit tired. You might look a bit exhausted. You might feel more tired. You might feel like not eating. You might lose weight. So those are some of the short-term physical effects. Cognitive, as in memory, you might have some of those problems. You might have difficulty concentrating on things. ಯಾರು ಏನು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ತಕ್ಷಣ ಮರ್ತೋಗ್ತದೆ. ನೆನಪಿರಲ್ಲ. You might be asked to do some work, you might go to that place to do that work, and you might forget what that is about. Now again, these are short-term effects of stress. These can be effects of stress. You might not realize. You might say, I don't know why I become so poor in memory. I don't know why I'm not able to remember. It might be an effect of stress. There can be emotional aspects as well. ಹೇಳಿದಾಗೆ, we all respond emotionally differently to stress. Some of us get angry, some of us get upset, and you might realize that those effects of stress, you're carrying it not just at the place of stress, you might be carrying it at home also. ಫ್ರೆಂಡ್ಸ್ ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಸಣ್ಣ ಸಣ್ಣ ವಿಷಯಕ್ಕೆ ಜಗಳ ಮಾಡೋದು, ಸಣ್ಣ ಸಣ್ಣ ವಿಷಯಕ್ಕೆ ಅವ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ರೇಗಾಡೋದು, ಅದೆಲ್ಲ ಆಗ್ಬೋದು. ದೋಸ್ ಆರ್ ದ ಇಮೋಷನಲ್ ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್. ಬಿಹೇವಿಯರಲ್ ಎಫೆಕ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಆಫ್ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಥಿಂಗ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ಯು ವುಡ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಡನ್ ಅದರ್ವೈಸ್. ನಿಮ್ದು either say for example ಒಂದು you might be doing exercise, you might be enjoying your cooking, you might stop doing that, you might stop enjoying your cooking, you might stop looking after yourself, you might stop doing makeup, you might stop wearing good clothes. ಯಾರು ಮಾಡೋದು ಇದು, ಸಾಕಾಗೋಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ. So these are all behavioral components of stress. So short term you would see these things, but there are long term effects that can happen, and most of the ones that I've put are physical or medical aspects, effects of stress, but there are a lot of social aspects as well. The long term effects of stress are cardiac problems, heart related problems, strokes agudu. People might develop diabetes and blood pressure, and it is well known that people with long term stress develop sugar control abnormalities and blood pressure control abnormalities. They might have lowered immunity, especially more important now. Long-term sleep disturbances. There are so many patients who I treat for insomnia, and I always tell them one thing, what are you doing about your stress? Until you handle your stress better, your sleep disturbances are going to continue. Sleeping pills are not going to be the answer. Premature aging and predominantly predisposition to psychiatric illnesses, naale depression, anxiety, ಇಂಥವೆಲ್ಲ ಕಾಯಿಲೆ ಬರಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಸುಮಾರು ಸತಿ ಕಾರಣ ಇರ್ತದೆ. There are a lot of other social aspects also as well. Difficulties in family, difficulties with children. ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ ಬಿಹೇವಿಯರಲ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ಸ್ ಆಗೋದು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಇಂದ, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಬಿಹೇವಿಯರ್ ದಿಂದ. ಮಕ್ಕಳು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಮಾತು ಕೇಳದೇ ಇರೋದು, ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆ ಜಗಳ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗೋದು, ಹೆಂಡತಿ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಗಂಡನ ಜೊತೆಗೆ ಜಗಳ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಆಗೋದು, ಫ್ಯಾಮಿಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ಸ್ ಆಗೋದು, interpersonal stressors, losing friends, losing touch with family. So these are all long-term effects of stress if you neglect it for too long. Okay, so I think I'll stop here for a brief while. I'll let Dr. Shishir do a small scale on how to measure and rate your stress. Try and be truthful because it will help you understand yourself better. It would help if you got a pen and a paper handy so that you can write down the scores. Okay? All right. Thank you. I'll just hand over to Dr. Shishir.
Okay, now that we've looked at how we respond to stress and the effects of stress, I think it would be useful to just think about how much we are experiencing stress in our lives. So we'll now look at stress measurement, and this is your individual stress levels, your perceived stress for each of you. So what I'll be doing now is I'll be putting a few questions. These are derived from the perceived stress scale. We have modified it to make it easy to understand and make it easy to score as well. So I'll be sharing a few questions. I want you to think about the question, write the question number, and choose the option that suits best for you. So I'll just show you the first question, for example. In the last 1 month, how often have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly? If the answer for that is never, score yourself 0. And if it is almost never, score yourself at 1. If it is sometimes, score 2. If it is fairly often, then give yourself a score of 3. And if it is very often, give yourself a score of 4. So in the last 1 month, how often have you been upset because of something that happened unexpectedly? And I want you to write the question number and the score that applies to it. So the next question, question 2, is in the last 1 month, how often have you felt that you were unable to control the important things in your life? So if it is never, score is 0, and it goes all the way to very often the score would be 4. Question number 3. In the last 1 month, how often have you felt nervous and stressed? Again, give yourself a score that applies to you. This is in the last 1 month. So never, almost never, sometimes, fairly often, or very often. Question number 4. In the last 1 month, how often have you felt unsure about your ability to handle your personal problems? In the last 1 month, how often have you felt unsure about your ability to handle your personal problems? So again, scoring from 0 to 4. So question 5. In the last 1 month, how often have you felt that things were not going your way? Question 6. In the last 1 month, how often have you found that you could not cope with all the things that you had to do? So again, scoring from 0 to 4. Question 7. In the last 1 month, how often have you been unable to control the irritations in your life? Question 8. In the last 1 month, how often have you felt that you were not on top of things? How often have you felt that you were not on top of things? So again, scoring from 0 to 4, from never to very often. Question 9. In the last 1 month, how often have you been angered because of the things that happened that were outside your control? And please note it's not how often that things happened outside your control, but how often have you felt angry or been angered because of things that happened outside your control? Question number 10, and this is the last question. So in the last 1 month, how often have you felt difficulties were piling up so high that you could not overcome them? Score 0 if it is never, and up to very often if it is 4. So now that you've scored yourselves for the 10 questions, now remember this is your individual scores, and these are experiences or perceptions that are unique and individual to each of you. So now I want you to add all the scores for all the 10 questions. Just add the total and see how much you have scored yourself. And if you received a score of less than 13 or less, then that suggests that your stress levels are low. And if you've scored yourself anything between 14 to 26, then you are experiencing moderate levels of stress. And any of you who have scored 27 or higher would be experiencing high levels of stress. And if you're experiencing high levels of stress, that's all the more reason for you to think about how you bring your stress levels down, how you cope differently with the stress. If you're scored moderate, then you're coping somewhat okay, but you might still be struggling with some of the things, so you could still learn better coping strategies as well. If you've scored yourself low at stressful levels, then you're doing well, and you can think about what are the things that you're doing well.
Thank you, Dr. Shishir, for doing the stress measurement. I suppose all of you now have got a general sense of where you lie with regards to stress. You've understood what you've understood is how severe or not severe is your stress. B, you probably also understood a little bit about how your emotions are when you're stressed. Third, you also realized a little bit about how you behave when you're stressed, what kind of strategies you employ in order to deal with stress. You fight, you fly, or you freeze. It's important because it will give you a better understanding of how you deal with it. So once we have understood how stressed we are, we've understood what how we behave when we are stressed, so that we know the signs of stress better. And I suppose we've covered this. Now we'll learn a little bit about how stress happens and what is your role in stress. Now, it might seem counterintuitive. You might say, ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಅನಿಸ್ಬೋದು ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ನನ್ನಿಂದ ಬರೋದಲ್ಲ ಬೇರೆಯವರಿಂದ ಬರೋದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ. But we'll try and understand this process better. ಆಯ್ತಾ? ಸರಿ. So one thing is, ನೀವು ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡಿರ್ಬೇಕು, it is what happens to us is a stressor. How we look at it, ನಮ್ದು appraisal, for example, here, our appraisal is what leads to stress. If we look at something that happened to us and understand it as something that happens to everyone, then we are able to accept it. If we feel that it is unfairly happening to us and it is difficult, doesn't happen to anyone, ನನಗೊಬ್ಬನಿಗೆ ಆಗಿದ್ದು ಯಾರಿಗೂ ಇದು ಆಗುದಿಲ್ಲ, if we worry too much about it, then the appraisal is likely to cause us stress. Okay, and coping will determine the outcome. We'll understand a little bit about it. Okay, sorry. So the same thing, say for example, ಮಕ್ಕಳು ಓದಿಲ್ಲ, one of your children got very less marks in exams. How you look at it? If you look at it as I did so much, ಇಷ್ಟೆಲ್ಲ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದೀನಿ, ಆದ್ರೂ ಈ ತರ ಆಗಿದೆ, ಮಗನ್ ಫ್ಯೂಚರ್ ಏನಾಗ್ತದೆ, ವಾಟ್ ವಿಲ್ ಹ್ಯಾಪನ್. If we keep worrying about it, it is likely to lead to more stress. If we say, okay, he hasn't done very well, let's look at what has happened in the last 6 months, what perhaps has not worked well, what do we need to change, and let's take it as a challenge and let's try and work things differently this time. Then the level of stress is less. Okay, so that is appraisal. Okay, so the moment you see stressor as a threat, your stress becomes high. The moment you see stressor as a challenge, as something that you need to get over, then it doesn't seem to be as stressful. And the next bit is, if you can cope with whatever stress has happened, then the stress seems to be low. If you are unable to cope with whatever has been happening, we still look at it as a threat and we try and cope, but we are not able to, then the stress becomes quite high. All right, so outcome depends on how you see it and how you cope with it. Both are important. How you see the stressor and how you cope. Okay, all right. No point in seeing it as a challenge and not being able to cope, because that will still go to high stress. Okay, all right. We'll come to how to coping much later. Mrs. Agneta Hyman will cover that. But before we go to coping, I need to present to you the Serenity Prayer. Now, we say this often in our department when sometimes stress becomes too much. You say, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. So, andre, what ನನಗೆ ಏನು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗುದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ, ಲೆಟ್ ಮಿ ಗಿವ್ ಮಿ ದ ಸೆರೆನಿಟಿ, ಅಕ್ಸೆಪ್ಟೆನ್ಸ್, ಅದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗುದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. ಚೇಂಜ್ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗ್ತದೋ ಅದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಧೈರ್ಯ ಕೊಡಿ. ಅಂಡ್ ದ ವಿಸ್ಡಮ್ ಟು ನೋ ದ ಡಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಬಿಟ್ವೀನ್ ಯಾವ್ದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗ್ತದೆ, ಯಾವ್ದು ಚೇಂಜ್ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗುದಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ. So this is the Serenity Prayer, and this is what will help you tide over stresses better. This is what will help you understand what are the things I need to take head on, what are the things I don't need to take head on, which are the things that I probably can let go and not be bothered too much about it, because they are things that you cannot change. Okay, all right, we'll come to so this is the second part we'll come to once we understand what happens to us when we are stressed. Next, we understand what causes stress. We'll understand what are things that are under our control and what are under not your control. Okay, so you perhaps thought a little bit about already in your mind about what are the things that cause you stress, and they may be issues at home, issues with the spouse, husband, wife, issues with children, their academics, issues with your work, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಬಾಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ, your workmates, financial matters, health related matters, COVID related issues. Okay, so in your mind, start using the Serenity Prayer and start putting things which are not under your control into that box, and start things which are under your control into that box, and know the difference. Things like your boss's mood, you cannot change that. Boss is what he is, or he or she is. If they are unpredictable and upset, that's their nature. You can perhaps not be affected by it, or you can tell people that you are affected. You can tell the boss that you're affected by it, and you have an issue with that. But that is not completely under your control. To a certain extent it is. Finances, it falls a little bit on both sides. There are some that you cannot change, like for example your income. Your expenses, perhaps to a certain extent, is under your control, again not fully. Then in that case you need to look at what else you need to do. Makkaladu paata, again, you teaching or how much time you spend is under your control. How much they learn or how much they understand, it is not under their control. ಅವರವರು ತಿಳುವಳಿಕೆ ಅವರವರಿಗೆ. You can't expect everybody to score good marks all the time. So those are the things. Start putting things which are under your control. Start putting things which are not under your control. That will give you greater control over the things that you need to change and things that you need to let go. Okay. Sorry, let's look at some of those aspects. Okay. So what are the things under your control? Your ability to prioritize work and personal obligations. Kelsa sumarashtiде. You got 8 things to do. Doing all 8 things is not possible. But you have the ability to prioritize what is to be done first, what is to be done second, what is to be done third, and preparing a hierarchy of those things. That's under your control. Okay. How people respond to you is not under your control. Makkalu ನಿಮ್ಮ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಏನು ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯ ಇಟ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾರೆ, what they think of you, how do they judge you, that is not under your control. You can't make people like you all the time. What is under your control is your reaction to people. ಜನರು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಏನಾದ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದಾಗ ನೀವು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ರಿಯಾಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರೋ ಅದು ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಇದೆ. ನೀವು ಸರಿ ಇಲ್ಲ, ನೀವು ಕೆಲಸ ಸರಿ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ, whether you change things, how you do, or you understand that this person responds negatively to everybody and you decide not to change, that is under your control. How you react to what has been said is under your control. You have a choice of getting upset about it, or you have a choice of either letting it go or dealing with that situation. Your reaction is under your control. Okay. Other people's feelings and thoughts are not under your control, but your thoughts are under your control. When you focus on things which are in your control, ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಂಟ್ರೋಲ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಹತೋಟಿದಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಿದೆ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಗಮನ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ರೆ, ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ಜಾಸ್ತಿ if you work harder on it, you'll feel more empowered, you'll feel more relief, you will be able to do more, and you'll feel stronger, you'll feel more confident. When you keep focusing on things which are outside your control, andre things like finances, or things like how the boss thinks of you, what other people think of you, if you keep worrying too much about it, you end up feeling hopeless, you end up feeling stress, end up feeling anxious. So again, remember the Serenity Prayer. Think about what are the things under your control and let go of things that are not under your control. Okay. So just an example of how our thoughts change our behavior and changes our emotion. I wanted to show this slide so that you understand focusing on things which are under your control and not under your control, how does it change things. Like for example, ನಾ ಏನು ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು ಪ್ರಯೋಜನ ಇಲ್ಲ. There's no point in even trying to do anything good because the boss is going to be bad anyway. Boss is going to scold me anyway. My colleagues are going to say that I've not done a good job in any case. So ನಾನು ಟ್ರೈನೇ ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. There's no point in doing anything. What happens when you think that way? What happens is then you start avoiding people, you start avoiding situations, you start becoming less active. Antara somberi ಆಗ್ತದೆ. You'll become a bit, not exactly the word, but lazy is what I can think of. Antara somberi. ಏನು ಮಾಡಿನೂ ಪ್ರಯೋಜನ ಇಲ್ಲ, ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಗೂ ಬೈಯೋದು. When you do that, you start avoiding people. That becomes part of your behavior. When that becomes part of your behavior, you start feeling worthless, you start getting discouraged, you start feeling that you're not doing anything well. In these times, you think of those words from Bhagavad Gita, karmanye vadikarasti ma phaleshvadachana. People say what they say to you. People, let them have a good or a bad opinion, but that shouldn't stop you from trying. You keep doing your thing. You don't worry about what they say. What happens then is you'll start doing things anyway. Your behavior will not change. And you will not feel worthless or discouraged because you will tell to yourself that this person is negative. He will have the same opinion, but you're going to try working in the way you have been taught, in the way you want to, and therefore you won't feel discouraged. Okay? So just an example of how thoughts change our behavior and in turn changes our emotions. A lot of times our thoughts impact our behavior, and sometimes we are right, sometimes we are wrong. There are many unhelpful patterns of thinking, like the one I gave an example just now. So this is a task for you to do in between before Mrs. Agneta Ayman starts with how to manage stress and how to cope with it. Okay. You ask yourself, what happens when you meet a senior officer that you do not like or you're afraid of? What are the thoughts that go into your mind? You don't like or you're afraid of this person. Do you avoid that person? Do you keep thinking that, he will scold you regardless? What do you do then? Do you then try and get away? Do you try and escape seeing that person or that person seeing you? What do you think gives an impression to the senior officer about you? If you were a senior officer and you saw somebody trying to avoid you purposely, what would you think as a senior officer? You see how our thought changes our behavior and in turn changes, the consequences of what outcome of what's going to happen. Okay. What happens if your boss asks you to do a job 5 minutes before you need to leave? This is a second example. ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ 5 ನಿಮಿಷ ಇದೆ, ನಿಮ್ಮ bus will leave in 10 minutes. You got 5 minutes to leave from your office and reach the bus, otherwise the bus will leave. Your boss tells you a job 5 minutes before you need to go. What do you do? How do you deal with that? Sometimes, it might be that you have to say to the boss that ಎಷ್ಟು ಅರ್ಜೆಂಟ್ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ, but I'm not able to do because I've got that one bus. One bus miss ಆದ್ರೆ I do not have the ability to go anywhere else. How many of you are able to say that? How many of you are able to negotiate with the boss saying that, if it's that urgent, can I do it first thing tomorrow morning? Or can you, I don't know how many of you work from home. I mean, I'm not advocating you do, but if it's that urgent, can you do that from home? Shouldn't your boss have told you earlier and not 5 minutes before? These are the things that affect our level of stress. One of the questions you need to ask yourself is how many of you are assertive enough to say what you feel like. This is not assertive ಅಂದ್ರೆ aggressive ಅಲ್ಲ. ಬಾಸ್ಗೆ ಹೇಳೋದು 5 ನಿಮಿಷ ಇದ್ರೆ ಇದೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗುದಿಲ್ಲ, ನನ್ನ ಬಸ್ ಇದೆ, ಮನೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಕೆಲಸ ಇದೆ, these things are waiting at home and I need to be home, I can't do this now. Sorry. So how many of you are able to do that? Okay, what happens when you make a mistake at work? How do you feel about it? Do you take it in your stride or accept ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ? ಕೆಲವೊಮ್ಮೆ ತಪ್ಪಾಗ್ತದೆ, ಏನು ಮಾಡ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಆಗುದಿಲ್ಲ. You try and do a job as good as you can, but sometimes you make mistakes. What are the thoughts that go in your mind? What happens when you're told that you did a job wrong? ನೀವು ಮಾಡಿದ ಕೆಲಸ ಸರಿ ಮಾಡಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ. How many of you get upset about it? ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನರಿಗೆ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಅನ್ಸತ್ತೆ ಅಯ್ಯೋ ನಾನು ಪ್ರತಿ ಸರ್ತಿ ಹೇಳಿದಾಗ ತಪ್ಪನೆ ಮಾಡೋದು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿ? ಎಷ್ಟು ಜನರಿಗೆ you get that feeling that you're not good enough, that there is somebody else who's much better than you are? How many of you struggle with that? You see how your thoughts change your level of stress. What do you do if you get called into the dean's chamber, principal's chamber, HOD chamber ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಕರೆದ್ರೆ ಮನಸ್ಸಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಾಗ್ತದೆ? Do you think, oh, this might be an opportunity to do something, to do better? Or do you think, ಅಯ್ಯೋ ಇನ್ನೊಂದು ಕೆಲಸ ಬರ್ತದೆ, there's more things at least coming my way? How many of you worry about that? How does that change your ability to do the work, and also how you assess and manage your stress? Think about these scenarios. You can write them down and give it a little bit of thought, because chances are some of these scenarios are playing a part in determining your level of stress. Okay, sorry. Once you get to know your thoughts, then we'll look at what is under your control and what is out of your control. But spend a little bit of time on writing on those situations. Okay. What causes stress? Our appraisal, our way of looking at that stressor, what causes stress, and how we cope determines the outcome. We also understood the signs of stress. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನಮಗೆ ಸ್ಟ್ರೆಸ್ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಹೇಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾಗೋದು? We understood that by way of how our behavior changes and how our emotions change. We also have understood a little bit about how we can look at things which are under our control, which are the things that are not under our control. And by classifying it as things which are under our control and things which are not under control, we'll be able to deal with stress better, because we'll be able to put aside things which are not under our control, because adenu madlik agodilla, but we'll be able to fight against the things which are under our control, so that we can gain mastery over it, and that will give you a feeling of empowerment and relief. Okay, so we'll hear now from Mrs. Agneta Ayman, who's from Department of Psychiatry itself. She's a psychiatric social worker. I'll let her continue from here on. Thank you.